What happens when Hollywood's most self-aware genius walks onto a daytime stage built for provocation, not nuance, and finds himself face-to-face with a host who has never flinched from pushing buttons? What happens when charm meets moral challenge, when wit collides with ideology, when a man known for reinventing himself is asked, live in front of millions? Whether redemption ever truly counts. Before we drop into this moment, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, hit like, and comment right now. Because stories like this don't happen often, and when they do, they change how we see our favorite stars forever. The studio lights of The View were brighter than usual that morning, sharp and unforgiving, bouncing off polished floors and glossy mugs like interrogation lamps. The audience buzzed with that familiar pre-show energy, half excitement, half curiosity, because Robert Downey Jr. was in the building. Not Iron Man. Not Tony Stark. Robert Downey Jr. the man. The comeback story. The walking contradiction Hollywood never quite figured out how to explain. Backstage, Downey stood quietly, adjusting his jacket, fingers brushing the lapel like he was grounding himself. He'd done thousands of interviews. He'd danced on late-night couches, riffed with hosts, deflected invasive questions with humor so smooth it felt rehearsed, because it was. But this felt different. He knew The View wasn't about soft landings. It was about conversation with teeth. A producer leaned in, voice hushed but urgent. "They're feeling spicy today." Downey smiled faintly. "Aren't they always?" Out on the panel, Whoopi Goldberg sat back in her chair, glasses low on her nose, scanning her notes with a calm that bordered on dangerous. She'd seen Hollywood rise and fall more times than she could count. She respected talent, yes, but she respected accountability more. To her, charm was not a shield. It was a test. Joy Behar whispered something under her breath. Sunny Hostin adjusted her papers. Alyssa Farah Griffin glanced toward the entrance, curious. The red light blinked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Robert Downey Jr." Applause erupted. The audience rose instinctively, clapping louder than protocol demanded. Downey stepped out, arms slightly open, acknowledging the room like a man who knew both how far he'd fallen and how rare it was to be standing here again. He hugged Whoopi first. A brief moment. Polite. Neutral. She smiled, but her eyes stayed searching. They sat. The first few minutes were easy. Too easy. Laughs came quickly. Stories flowed, behind-the-scenes anecdotes, the absurdity of fame, how Marvel changed everything. Downey was on rhythm now, timing his jokes just right, self-deprecating without self-pity. The audience loved it. Then Whoopi leaned forward. "So, Robert," she said, voice steady, conversational, "you've become the poster child for redemption in Hollywood." Downey nodded. "I suppose that's one way to put it." She tilted her head. "Do you think everyone deserves that kind of second chance?" The air shifted. Not dramatically. Subtly, like a door closing somewhere. Downey chuckled lightly. "I think everyone deserves the opportunity to change." Whoopi didn't smile. "Opportunity is one thing. Access is another." The audience murmured. Downey felt it. The warmth cooled. She continued. "You had resources. Support. A system that wanted you back. A lot of people make mistakes, some smaller than yours, and never get that door reopened." Downey's jaw tightened, just for a second. "That's true," he said carefully. "I was fortunate. But is fortune the same as fairness?" Whoopi asked. Silence stretched. Cameras zoomed in. Downey leaned back, crossed his legs. He'd expected this, hadn't he? Maybe. But expectation doesn't blunt impact. "No," he said. "It's not fairness. It's reality. And I can't apologize for surviving my own life." A few claps. A few gasps. Whoopi raised an eyebrow. "I'm not asking you to apologize for surviving. I'm asking whether Hollywood applauds redemption only when it comes in a palatable, profitable package." There it was. Joy Behar jumped in, half laughing. "She's saying you're very marketable, darling." Downey smiled thinly. "I've never denied that the industry is selective. But do you benefit from that selectivity?" Whoopi pressed. Downey looked at her now, really looked. Not as a co-host. As a challenger. "Yes," he said. "I do. And I try to use that position responsibly." "Try," Whoopi repeated. "Or do." The audience was silent now. No nervous laughter. No applause cues. Downey inhaled slowly. His voice dropped. "Whoopi, I've spent decades trying to become a better man than I was yesterday. If that's not enough for some people, I understand. But I won't pretend my past disqualifies my present." Whoopi's expression softened, but only slightly. And I won't pretend that personal growth erases public harm. The words landed heavy. Sunny Hostin leaned forward. This is interesting because... But Whoopi held up a hand. She wasn't done. This isn't about you alone, she said. It's about the story Hollywood tells using you. Downey nodded slowly. And maybe that story gives people hope. Or maybe, Whoopi said quietly, it teaches them that consequences are negotiable if you're talented enough. A collective inhale from the crowd. Downey's smile was gone now, replaced by something rawer, more human. You think I negotiated my consequences? He asked. I think the system did, Whoopi replied. The tension was thick enough to feel in the back row. Downey leaned forward, elbows on knees. I went to jail. I lost everything. I was uninsurable. Unhireable. I wasn't a bet until I was. And who decided you were worth that bet? Whoopi asked. Downey paused. People, he said, who believed I could be more. Whoopi nodded. And that belief, who gets it, who doesn't, that's what I'm interrogating. The camera cut to the audience. Faces split. Some nodding. Some frowning. All watching. Downey exhaled, a hint of frustration breaking through. I can't carry the weight of every injustice on my back just because I made it through mine. Whoopi leaned back now. No, but you can acknowledge the imbalance without centering yourself as the exception. That stung, and everyone knew it. Downey sat back too, hands clasped. Fair enough. For a moment, it looked like the storm might pass. But the silence that followed was louder than any argument. And somewhere between the applause signs and the blinking studio lights, it became clear. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a reckoning, and it was only just beginning. The silence after that last exchange didn't fade. It settled. It pressed down on the table like an unseen weight, forcing everyone to sit straighter, to breathe more carefully. The kind of silence that television hates, but truth feeds on. Producers shifted behind the cameras. Someone in the control room mouthed, "Keep rolling." Robert Downey Jr. felt the familiar instinct rise, the one that had saved him countless times before. Deflect. Charm. Turn it into a joke. But this time, the joke stayed lodged somewhere behind his teeth. He knew better. The room wasn't in the mood for escape. Whoopi Goldberg watched him with the patience of someone who had lived through enough storms to recognize when one was still gathering strength. She wasn't angry. That was the unsettling part. She was focused. Joy Behar broke first, unable to let the tension breathe too long. Well, she said with a half-smile, tapping her mug, this got very serious very fast. A ripple of nervous laughter rolled through the audience, thin and fragile. Downey nodded slowly. It does that sometimes, he said. Especially when you stop talking about movies. Whoopi turned slightly toward Joy, then back to Downey. But movies are part of this, Robert. That's the point. Sunny Hostin leaned in again, sensing the gravity. You've played characters who get forgiven, who get to start over. Do you think that influences how people see your real-life story? Downey considered this. His eyes flicked briefly to the audience, then back to the table. I think stories shape us whether we admit it or not, he said. But I don't confuse my characters with my conscience. Whoopi's voice cut in gently but firmly. The audience might. That landed differently. Not accusatory. Observational. Downey felt a flicker of irritation, quickly swallowed by something else, recognition. He'd spent years being both symbol and subject, never fully in control of which version people saw when they looked at him. I never asked to be a symbol, he said. Whoopi nodded. None of us do. They just put it on you. Alyssa Farah Griffin finally spoke, trying to widen the lens. Isn't there something powerful, though, about seeing someone fall publicly and come back? Doesn't that send a positive message? Whoopi turned toward her. It can. Or it can send the message that falling is fine, as long as you're entertaining enough on the way back up. The audience reacted audibly now, a mix of agreement and discomfort. The show had slipped out of its usual rhythm, and everyone could feel it. Downey leaned back, rubbing his hands together slowly. He wasn't defensive anymore. He was thinking. You know what the hardest part was? He said suddenly. It wasn't jail. It wasn't losing the work. It was realizing that people didn't trust my sincerity. That every good thing I did after was seen as strategy. Whoopi's expression shifted, just a touch. And do you think that suspicion came from nowhere? No, Downey admitted. It came from my own history of lying to myself. That answer surprised the audience. A murmur rippled through them, more sympathetic this time. Downey continued, voice quieter now. I spent years convincing myself I was fine. that I had control, that I was smarter than my addiction. So yeah, when people questioned my comeback, I understood it. Whoopi folded her hands. Then you understand why some people question the celebration of it. Downey met her gaze. I do. But questioning celebration is different from denying growth. Sonny jumped in carefully. So where's the line? Downey didn't answer immediately. He looked down at the table, tracing an invisible line with his finger. The cameras zoomed in, catching the micro-expressions, the tension in his jaw, the weight in his eyes. The line, he said finally, is whether we believe people are capable of becoming something they weren't before. Whoopi tilted her head. And who decides when they've crossed that line? Downey looked up. Maybe no one gets to decide. Maybe it's not a verdict, it's a process. Whoopi smiled faintly. That's a very generous framing. Growth usually is, Downey replied. Joy Behar laughed softly. I feel like I'm watching a philosophy class. But Whoopi wasn't done. She leaned forward again, closer now, lowering her voice. Not for drama, but for precision. Robert, let me ask you something directly. If someone else, less famous, less beloved, had done exactly what you did, do you think they'd be sitting here today? The question hung in the air like smoke. Downey didn't dodge it. No, he said. Probably not. A beat. And that bothers me, he added. The audience applauded, this time louder, more genuine. Not because the tension was gone, but because honesty had finally pierced through it. Whoopi nodded slowly. Good. Because that discomfort? That's where the real conversation lives. Downey exhaled, a small, weary smile tugging at his lips. You're very good at this, you know. Whoopi smiled back. I've had practice. There was a brief pause, a natural place for the show to pivot. But instead of easing off, the conversation deepened. The producers could feel it slipping into something unplanned, and yet they let it run. Sonny glanced at her notes. There's also the question of accountability versus punishment. At what point does holding someone to their past stop being justice and start being cruelty? Downey nodded appreciatively. Exactly. Whoopi turned to Sonny. It depends on who's being protected. The person who did harm, or the people who were harmed. Downey's eyes flickered again. And what if both deserve protection? That question shifted the energy entirely. Less combative. More existential. Whoopi leaned back, crossing her arms. Then we're talking about balance. And balance is something institutions, especially Hollywood, are terrible at. Downey laughed quietly. That's the understatement of the decade. The audience laughed with him, easing the tension just a fraction. But then Whoopi delivered the line that cracked it open again. Do you ever worry, she asked, that your story makes it easier for the industry to avoid changing, because they can point to you and say, see? It works. Downey froze. For the first time since the interview began, he didn't have an immediate answer. The cameras caught it. The hesitation. The swallow. I worry about that, he said slowly. More than you might think. Whoopi waited. I worry that my survival becomes an excuse, he continued, instead of a catalyst. That word, catalyst, echoed. And is it? Whoopi asked. Downey looked out at the audience now. Not the cameras. The people. I try to make it one, he said. By being honest. By not pretending I fix myself alone. By saying out loud that luck played a role. Whoopi nodded. That matters. Joy Behar chimed in, softer now. You know, people don't expect this kind of depth from daytime TV. Whoopi smiled. Maybe they should. Downey chuckled. I was promised light banter. The audience laughed again, tension easing but not dissolving. Sonny smiled at him. Welcome to the View. Downey shook his head, amused. Lesson learned. But even as the laughter faded, there was a sense, shared by everyone in the room, that something irreversible had happened. The interview had crossed a line from promotion into confrontation, from performance into perspective. Whoopi looked at Downey one last time before the segment break. I don't question your growth, Robert, she said. I question the system that rewards it selectively. Downey nodded. Fair. The applause sign lit up, and the audience clapped, longer this time, louder, unsure whether they were applauding the honesty, the tension, or the bravery of letting it stay messy. As the cameras pulled back and the show cut to commercial, Downey leaned back in his chair, staring up at the studio lights. His reflection shimmered faintly in the polished surface of the table. Older, sharper, more aware than the man who had walked out just minutes earlier. Backstage, producers exchanged glances. Social media feeds were already lighting up. Clips were being clipped. Quotes were being typed. Because everyone could feel it now. This wasn't just a conversation. It was about to become a moment. And once the cameras came back on, there would be no undoing it. When the cameras snapped back on, the energy in the studio had shifted again. But this time it wasn't tense in the way of a brewing argument. It was charged, focused, like the calm that settles right before something breaks open. Robert Downey Jr. straightened in his chair, rolling his shoulders once as if resetting his posture. The audience noticed. Whoopi noticed. That small movement said more than words ever could. He was still here, still engaged, not retreating. Whoopi glanced toward the camera, then back at him. "We're back," she said evenly. "And this conversation isn't finished." The audience murmured in agreement, a low hum of anticipation. Downey gave a small nod. "I didn't think it would be." Joy Behar leaned in with a grin that didn't quite hide her curiosity. "You know Twitter is already on fire, right?" Downey smiled faintly. "That's comforting." A ripple of laughter eased the room, but Whoopi didn't let it drift too far. She turned serious again, folding her hands on the table. "Robert," she said, "you talked about growth as a process, about not being a verdict. But there are people watching right now who've been hurt by men who also claimed they were in process." The audience stilled. This wasn't theoretical anymore. Downey's expression changed. The wit drained away, replaced by something heavier. "I know," he said, "and I would never ask anyone to accept an apology they don't feel." Sonny Hostin nodded. "That's important," Whoopi continued. "So how do we separate genuine change from performance?" Downey let out a slow breath. "Time," he said. "Consistency. And the willingness to sit in discomfort, like this, without demanding forgiveness." That answer hit. The audience responded with quiet applause, respectful, restrained. Whoopi studied him. "You're sitting in it right now." Downey met her gaze. "Because I've learned what happens when I don't." Joy chimed in, more gently now. "You know, a lot of stars would have shut this down. You didn't." Downey shrugged slightly. "Running used to be my default. It didn't end well." That drew a soft laugh, but it was tinged with sadness. Alyssa Farah Griffin leaned forward. "Do you ever feel trapped by your own redemption narrative?" Downey paused. "Yes," he said simply. "Because it leaves no room to fail again." The audience reacted, surprised murmurs, nods. That wasn't a polished answer. It was raw. "What happens," Alyssa pressed, "if you mess up now?" Downey smiled without humor. "Then people say, 'See? We knew it.'" Whoopi interjected. "That's the cost of public forgiveness. It's conditional." Downey nodded. "And fragile." Sonny leaned in. "Is that fair?" Downey thought for a moment. "Fairness isn't really part of the equation anymore. Visibility is." Whoopi's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Explain that." "When you're visible," Downey said, "your mistakes become lessons for other people, whether you consent to that or not." "And does that absolve you of anything?" Whoopi asked. "No," Downey said quickly. "It just explains the pressure." The audience felt it now, the exhaustion beneath the composure. The weight of carrying not just a career, but a narrative. Whoopi shifted in her chair. "Let me push once more," she said. "Because this matters." Downey nodded. "I'm listening." "You've benefited from people believing in your change," she said. "What responsibility do you think you have to believe in others, especially when it's inconvenient?" Downey's brow furrowed. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about what came after him. "I think," he said slowly, "that if I'm going to accept grace, I have to extend it, carefully, responsibly, but not selectively." The audience applauded louder this time. The tone had shifted from confrontation to reckoning. Whoopi smiled faintly. "That's a strong answer." Downey exhaled. "It's also a hard one to live up to." Joy Behar leaned back, crossing her arms. "Welcome to being human." Laughter rippled again, warmer now. But then Whoopi asked the question no one expected. "Do you think," she said, "that Hollywood would forgive you again?" The room froze. Downey blinked. "Once. Twice. I don't know," he admitted. "And that uncertainty keeps me honest." Sonny raised her eyebrows. "That's not a bad thing." "No," Downey agreed. "But it's not comfortable." Whoopi nodded. "Growth rarely is." The audience applauded again, this time sustained. Not raucous, but deeply felt. Downey looked around the studio, at the faces, the lights, the table where he'd spent the last hour peeling back layers he usually kept protected. "You know," he said, "I came here to talk about a movie." Joy laughed. "You did. We remember." Downey smiled. "But this is better." Whoopi tilted her head. "Better. More honest," Downey said. And honesty is the only thing that ever actually saved me. There was a pause. A real one. The kind you don't cut away from. The applause sign stayed dark. No one needed instruction. Whoopi finally spoke. Then let's end this part of the conversation on that. She turned to the camera. When we come back, we'll wrap up. As the segment drew to a close, the audience rose. Not in the explosive standing ovation of celebrity worship, but in something quieter. Respect. Recognition. Downey stood too, nodding to them, his expression thoughtful, almost shaken. Behind the cameras, producers were already pulling up social feeds. Clips from the interview were trending. Headlines were forming in real time, sharp and polarized. Some called it courageous. Others called it uncomfortable. A few called it overdue. Downey took a sip of water, hands steady now. He'd walked into a studio expecting promotion, and walked into a mirror instead. Whoopi adjusted her glasses, glancing at him one last time before the show moved on. This wasn't a takedown. It wasn't a victory. It was something rarer. A conversation that refused to flinch. And outside those studio walls, it was already echoing, growing louder, spreading faster, turning into something neither of them could control. The aftermath was coming, and it wouldn't be quiet. When the final segment ended and the cameras powered down, the applause didn't stop right away. It lingered, uneven, uncertain, charged with the strange awareness that everyone in the room had just witnessed something that wouldn't stay contained within studio walls. Robert Downey Jr. exhaled deeply as he stepped away from the table, the weight of the conversation finally settling into his shoulders. The adrenaline that had carried him through the last hour began to fade, replaced by a quiet, unsettled clarity. This wasn't the kind of interview you left behind when you walked out the door. Whoopi Goldberg stood as well, adjusting her jacket. She didn't rush. She never did. As Downey turned toward her, she met his eyes, not as an adversary, not as a host, but as someone who had seen this moment unfold exactly as it needed to. "You okay?" she asked softly off mic. Downey nodded, then paused. "Yeah," he said. "Uncomfortable. But yeah." Whoopi smiled just a little. "Good. That means it mattered." They shared a brief, unspoken understanding before producers swooped in, voices overlapping, phones already buzzing in their hands. In the audience, people stood frozen in place for a few extra seconds, processing. Some wiped at their eyes. Others shook their heads in disbelief. This wasn't the tidy resolution daytime television usually promised. There was no winner. No clean takeaway. Just questions, sharp ones, that followed everyone as they filed out of the studio. Outside, the internet had already exploded. Clips of the exchange flooded social media, trimmed into sharp, viral moments. Whoopi's question about selective redemption. Downey's admission about luck. The pause, that pause, when he couldn't answer right away. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Some hailed Whoopi as fearless, saying she'd voiced what many were afraid to ask. Others accused her of ambushing a man who had already paid his dues. Many praised Downey for staying, for not deflecting, for letting the discomfort breathe. Others insisted charm had once again softened accountability. Hashtags trended. Think pieces followed within hours. The View delivers most intense celebrity moment of the year. Robert Downey Jr. faces Hollywood's redemption problem, live. Whoopi Goldberg doesn't let the comeback story off the hook. By evening, the clips had crossed platforms, crossing audiences that never watched daytime TV at all. Film critics weighed in. Activists weighed in. Fellow actors subtweeted cryptic reactions. Some applauded the conversation. Others called it performative. A few admitted it made them rethink everything. Downey watched it unfold from a quiet room later that night, scrolling slowly, deliberately. He didn't respond. No statement. No tweet. Just silence. For once, he didn't want to control the narrative. He'd said what he needed to say, on camera, without edits. Sources close to the show whispered that producers hadn't expected it to go that far. That some sponsors had raised eyebrows. That others quietly approved. The network released a neutral statement praising open dialogue. Whoopi, meanwhile, addressed it the only way she ever did, by not apologizing. The next day, she looked straight into the camera and said, "We don't come here to be comfortable. We come here to be honest." That line alone became its own headline. Days later, the conversation still hadn't died. Podcasts dissected every exchange. Fans replayed it frame by frame. Critics argued not just about Downey or Whoopi, but about the system that had put them there, the culture that celebrated downfall and comeback in equal measure. And somewhere beneath the noise, a quieter realization took hold. This wasn't about canceling someone. It wasn't about protecting someone. It was about asking whether growth, forgiveness, and accountability could exist in the same room, without one silencing the other. Robert Downey Jr. didn't walk away damaged. Whoopi Goldberg didn't walk away victorious. They both walked away having cracked something open. And once cracked, it couldn't be sealed again. Now it's your turn. Did Whoopi push too hard, or ask exactly the right questions? Did Robert Downey Jr. show true accountability, or the privilege of a perfected comeback? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This conversation doesn't end here. And if you want more cinematic, intense, no-holds-barred celebrity moments like this, subscribe to Stage View, hit like, and stay with us. Because some interviews aren't just watched. They're felt.